Richard Miller, born in Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1933. Is in May of 1933. 24th, I'll be 81 years old in another week or so.
And tell me about your family.
I have had one sibling sister, now deceased, but my mother and father were both worked in industry, and after Pearl Harbor, we moved from Wisconsin to Southern California. Which my dad worked in the defense. Well, they both did. Both my mother and father worked in the defense industry.
So, what school did you go through?
My school was Bell Gardens High School, or the Bell Gardens, California school system, elementary, intermediate, and high school. I didn't complete high school when I should have.
So, when did you quit the high school?
I joined the National Guard when I was in junior high school, totally illegally. And that was in 1948. And of course, the Korean War broke out in 1950. And President Truman activated my National Guard division September 1st, 1950. And that was during summer vacation, so I failed to show up for my 11th grade in high school.
So President Truman activated your division in when? September?
September 1st, 1950.
So that's why you couldn't continue on your education.
That's correct.
Right.
At that time. I did much later on the GI Bill.
Did you know anything about Korea at the time that you were in high school and you were drafted?
I was not aware of the difficulties that South Korea was going through at the time. And obviously my officers and non-commissioned officers in the National Guard was not, or I'd have never gotten accepted.
Oh, you were not accepted?
I was, but not if they anticipated any kind of conflict. And but I enjoyed the training. That was one weekend, one night per week, and generally 2 weeks training in the summer, type of thing.
So you were not aware about Korea, where it is, and what's happening there?
I was aware of wasn't aware of what was happening, but I knew where it was. Yeah.
Oh, where did you learn that?
I was a good student as long as it lasted. Of course, I feel that I learned more probably through my 10th grade than most people do through junior college today, frankly. Our school system was really good.
So that's saying that you learn about Korea in your high school history class? How did they teach you about Korea? What did you learn about Korea?
It was more just where countries were, not, worldwide. Many of the names have changed. The countries' names have changed. But I wasn't that knowledgeable about Korea. Maybe where it was.
So what happened to you? How did you come to go to Korea?
Our unit was mobilized and we went by train up to Camp Cook which is probably, it's close to Santa Maria, California, on the coast. And I think it is part of the Vandenberg Air Force Base reservation, probably non-existent today, because it was, the camp was probably torn down after the Korean War. I was sent to Fort Ord to a leadership school. Leadership obviously was and part of my unit was in the headquarters company, and in an intelligence section. And our job was we had to trick in draftees to fill up our unit TO&E before we could start our training cycle. And I was learning in leadership school how to prepare and teach period of instruction on any given number of subjects that are required. And I was quite good at it, quite frankly, and I was happy about that. And I think I was recognized by my superiors, and I became part of a lead group, because also the training was going to be, of the whole division, was going to be in Japan before the unit moved into Korea. And that's what got me to Japan and to Korea preliminarily, was an advanced group for the training purposes. And then by this time, they recognized that I hadn't shown up for high school. Quite a few of us. There was a lot more guys like myself that had done this.
So you were in Japan, and that's the time that the military found out that you didn't show up for high school.
The Montebello Unified School District truant officer found where I was. So the truant officer, and by California law, you must remain in school until you're 18 years old.
But your National Guard unit was mobilized. That's why you didn't show up at the school, right?
Well, I spoke to my father, and he says, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I asked for it, so I will continue to be in the military until." But that was against what the law said, and that's why the military was compelled by the state government and the school board to send me back to go to school. So that's when I came back, and that's when I was honorably discharged at that point in time.
When was it? When was it? Do you remember?
What actual date?
Yeah.
I think it was February probably of 1951.
So you never been in Korea?
Hadn't ever been in Korea before that, no.
No. You went to Japan, and then did you go to Korea from
Yes.
there? Oh, tell me
We
about
were part of the advanced group just to see the organization. We went to Busan.
Uh-huh.
And
when did you arrive in Busan?
How did we flew? We flew from. I was part of a group, so we flew. We didn't go by ship, which most people were. Spent 2 weeks on the water to go. But we flew to Japan, and then we went over to Korea just as a fact-finding, getting our act together, so to speak, before we started training.
Mm-hmm.
And it was still very disorganized and whatnot. And, most of the people in my unit had not been in combat in World War II. They were my senior, but mainly World War II veterans. And very good people. Very good people.
So what did you do in Korea? For how long? When did you arrive in Korea?
6 weeks.
Tell me about your 6 weeks.
Just seeing the different opinions of the people and the comments that my fellow military guys here were made. It was a mystery. My first time away from home, and I was still very young, and but then I got caught up in this political thing, and so I was really removed from the unit and waiting transportation back to the States, which was aboard a ship at this time.
So you told me before the interview that in the military test, there was questions about Korea and Japan, right?
Well, there were many questions about geography.
Tell me about it.
Well, and you didn't have a map in front of you, or an atlas. So this was just kind of an impromptu questioning, and the answers obviously were pretty accurate. I mean, and it was mainly questions about Asia and the Pacific that were asked. I mean, but Korea was not the only one. I specifically remember the question about what direction is Korea from Japan?
What direction?
I mean, at 81 years old, I still remember that one.
What direction?
What was my answer?
No. The question, could you repeat?
The question was, what direction is Korea from Japan?
And what was your answer?
Well, my answer generally was just the fact that it was north and west of Japan.
So you were right.
Yeah, we didn't know if we were right, though. Until we got the answer to, this was several days of testing on every subject you could imagine.
So what happened to you after you returned from Korea?
Well, I went back to school, and after my responsibilities, I had a lot of responsibilities in the military. High school was really very difficult. Strangely enough, I ran into the high school night principal for night school, and he was my 7th grade typing teacher in junior high school. And we had a chat, and he says, well, asking why I didn't take the GED test.
What is GED?
General Education and Development. And very specific questions on where you were. And I blew through that with flying colors. So I had to do 1 semester in civics and one elective, and I had my diploma before my normal graduation time in '52. So I kind of graduated in late 1951. And then I started going to junior college at night school, and I had a job in a manufacturing business for equipment for the petrochemical industry. And I got very enthusiastic about engineering of pressure vessels, pressure piping systems, and metallurgy and whatnot. So that I spent an awful lot of time in that, and promoted really quickly. Still, my service in the National Guard did not protect me from the draft. But now I'm old enough to go into a reserve unit. And there were some fellows that I worked with that were in the Naval Air Reserve at Los Alamitos Naval Air Station in Southern California. So I went and joined the National Guard Navy Reserve, and was in the Navy Reserve but my position in the unit was associate volunteer. The TO was full in my squadron, so I was kind of an extra. But trained as an aviation engine mechanic for a better part of a year. which was very interesting because I was in a volunteer position in an squadron that I was an extra party, so I was still subject for the draft. So I said instead of doing that, I enlisted in the Army instead of being drafted. And I got to pick certain schools if I wanted to, but I had to go back through basic training all over again for, infantry basic was 16 weeks at the time. I think after 8 weeks, I was supposed to go to a helicopter flight school, but the company commander in my training unit recognized my prior military experience, and I was made a platoon sergeant, trainee platoon sergeant. So I kind of like that. I had Class A pass. I could go home on weekends and whatnot. But after the 8 weeks, when I'm supposed to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for helicopter training, my orders were cut for what was it, Camp Stoneman, up in the Bay Area, Sacramento River, and for Korea. And I said, well, what about this? You know, I'm supposed to go. My company commander says, I don't know, let's go to personnel. So we went to personnel. I violated my enlistment by staying on the second 8-week period at his request. And he said, but you can have your training if you re-enlist for 6 years. And at this time, I'm pretty angry with the military. And I said, well, where are we going? And we're going to Korea. So
when was it?
I went back to Korea.
When?
At 53. At 1953.
So that was during the war or after the war?
The war was in negotiation when I got there.
Okay.
And we all had our little 4-letter tags on us. This was on board a ship now. Mm-hmm. When I got there, my code word was BIVE, B-I-V-E. Mm-hmm. And the guy says, well, you're supposed to be in Okinawa. In other words, I was supposed to be back in Yokohama on that ship going to Okinawa. And I says, no. I says, this is a Busan tag. No, your orders were screwed up. You're supposed to go to Okinawa. So back to Okinawa for 2 years. And my job in Okinawa was keeping the dust off our nuclear weapons. My specialty was chemical, biological, and radiological decontamination.
You had to come back because you didn't finish the high school. Now you're back into the Korea. You thought that you're going to do something in Korea, but you was brought back to Japan.
What I wanted to enlist for, the draft was for 2 years, 24 months. But there were no advantages to training or anything to be drafted. There were advantages if you enlisted. And I have been returned to Korea many times on business. I worked for an engineering firm that did refinery petrochemical work. We quoted on a Kukdong refinery in Busan. And the Korean government said that all the material, half of the material and equipment had to originate from Korea, so we knew very little bit about Korean manufacturing, so I went back for a month and traveled Incheon, Busan, Busan, Okpo Island. And I was kidding you, that's when I had a retired colonel flying me around the country. But the interest on the part of the Korean manufacturers, where the company I worked for was bought by a Middle Eastern country. Kuwait Petroleum. And we had a grassroots refinery going on in Kuwait, and Korean manufacturers wanted to get opportunities to quote on that equipment. It was a very interesting experience, and I think I told you that I had a job offer at one point in time from Hyundai, and they're manufacturing people, not the automobile. And I did what Hyundai is a motor in Korean, is that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's correct?
Yeah.
But I've been to their shipbuilding facilities and dramatic. It was absolutely dramatic, the progress that had been made.
Working with the Korean economy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very new perspective about the role played by the Korean War veterans for the later phase of Korean economic development.
But I was still international. I did the same thing in Canada, same thing in Russia, you know, in European countries too.
Any other comments that you want to add?
You had to appreciate the way the country supported our military during World War II. There wasn't a GI that was walking down the street or down a road that wasn't stopped by 50 people. Can we give you a ride? And can we do? And that just didn't happen to the returning vets from Korea. And I remember flying into LAX, and I returning, and I had my duffel bag and my AWOL bag, and I lived 17 miles from the airport, east of LAX, and there was no direct transportation. I would have had to transfer on buses a dozen times I says, I think I'll walk. So I decided walking down Manchester Boulevard, and I walked 11 miles, and hitchhiking never, and I finally was picked up by a major in the Marine Corps, a female major. And I says, any far as you go east? And she says, I'll take you home. But it just wasn't there, the feeling, the attitude. And Vietnam was worse. I mean, nobody spat on us, and nobody keyed your car and were destructive to your property. And but that's basically why I'm doing what I'm doing. And there, you can see the age of the guys that were here. They're 85 and 86. I'll be 81, and it's still my war.
What are you doing for other veterans?
What am I doing for other veterans? Well, it's very difficult because of the way the book Korean Reborn was great. The disadvantage is the fact that the books are sent to one spot. And in Colorado, it's a major in the National Guard. I called him, asked him what he was doing for Western Colorado when he hung up on me. And the editor in the paper, or the article, you have the article in the paper, she called him too, and that was the same problem. And that's our own little war between Eastern and Western Colorado. They don't think we exist here in many instances. But a friend of mine, Neil McCain in Oregon, got 500 books. And of that 500 books, I'm going to have about 120 of it. But,
all right. Thank you so much, Richard.
No problem.
Thank you.